Going back to this paper, a new empirical constraint on the prevalence of technological species in the universe. This paper that expands on the Drake equation. What are some interesting things in this paper?
Well, so the main thing we were trying to do with this paper is say, look, we have all of this exoplanet data, right? It's got to be good for something, especially since two of the terms that have been nailed down empirically are two terms in the Drake equation. So F sub P, that's the second term, fraction of stars that have planets, and then N sub E, the average number of planets in the habitable zone. Those are the second and third term in the Drake equation. So what that means is all the astronomical terms have been nailed. And so we said, like, okay, how do we use this to do something with the Drake equation? And so what we realized is, well, okay, we got to get rid of time. The lifetime thing, we can't say anything about that. But if we don't ask how long do they last, but instead ask, what's the probability that there have been any civilizations at all, no matter how long they lasted? I'm not asking whether they exist now or not. I'm just asking in general about probabilities to make a technological civilization anywhere and at any time in the history of the universe. And that we were able to constrain. And so what we found was basically that there have been 10 billion trillion habitable zone planets in the universe. And what that means is those are 10 billion trillion experiments that have been run. And the only way that we're the only time that this is, this whole process from, abiogenesis to a civilization has occurred is if every one of those experiments failed, right? So therefore you could put a probability, we called it the pessimism line, right? We don't really know what nature sets for the probability of making intelligent civilizations, right? But we could set a limit using this. We could say, look, as if the probability per habitable zone planet is less than 10 to the minus 22, 1 in 10 billion trillion, then yeah, we're alone. If it's anywhere larger than that, then we're not the first. It's happened somewhere else. And to me, that was mind-blowing. It doesn't tell me there's anybody nearby. The galaxy could be sterile. It just told me that, unless nature's really has some bias against civilizations, we're not the first time this has happened. This has happened elsewhere over the course of cosmic history.
10 billion trillion experiments.
Yeah, that's a lot of experiments.
That's a lot.
Right.
1,000 is a lot.
Yeah.
100 is a lot.
Yeah.
If we normal humans saw 100 experiments and we knew that at least one time there was a successful human civilization built, I mean, we would say for sure in 100 you'll get another one.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I mean. That's why. So this, these kinds of arguments, you have to be careful of what they can do. But I felt like what this paper showed was that, the burden of proof is now on the pessimists, right? So that's why we called it the pessimism line. There's been, throughout history, there's been, alien pessimists and alien optimists, and they've been yelling at each other. That's all they had to go with, right? And like with Giordano Bruno in 1600, they burned the guy at the stake for being an alien optimist. But nobody really knew what pessimism or optimism meant. This, we sort of thought this was like the Planck length. This was sort of the Planck length of astrobiology. Gave you an actual number that, if you could somehow calculate what the probability, of forming a technological civilization was, this thing sort of shows you where the limit is. As long as you're above 10 to the minus 22, then you actually, absolutely, it has occurred in the history. Other civilizations have occurred in the history of the universe.
So to me, at least, the big question is FE, which is basically abiogenesis. How hard is it for life to originate on a planet? Because all the other ones seem very likely. Everything seems very likely. The only open question to me is like, how hard is it for life to originate?
There's lots of ways to, again, we don't know unless we look. And, you had Sarah Walker on not too long ago. She's very interested in origins of life. So, lots of people are working on this. But I think it's hard looking at the history of the Earth. And again, you can do Bayesian arguments on this. But yeah, forming life, I don't think it's hard. Getting like basic biology started, I don't think is hard. It's still wild. It's an amazing process that actually I think requires some deep rethinking about how we conceptualize what life is and what life isn't. That's one of the things I like about Sarah's work. We're pursuing on a different level about the life as the only process or the only system that uses information. But still, regardless of all those kinds of details, life is probably easy to make. That's my gut feeling.
Yeah, I mean, day by day this changes for me, but I just see that once you create bacteria, it's off to the races.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna get complex life.
Yeah.
As long as you have enough time. I mean, that boring billion, but I just can't imagine a habitable planet not having a couple of billion to spare.
Yeah, a couple
years.
billion years to spare. There is a mystery there about why did it take so long, like with the Cambrian explosion, but that may be, again, about these windows, that like you couldn't happen until the planet and the life had evolved together enough that they together kind of opened the window for the next step. Intelligent life and how long technological civilizations. I think there's a big question about how long those last and how, I'm hopeful, but in terms of just like, I think life is absolutely going to be common pretty common in the universe.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely like, I think, again, if I were to bet everything, even advanced civilizations are common. So to me, then the only explanation is the L. Our galaxy is a graveyard of civilizations.
Yeah, because you think about it, we've only been around. I mean, as a truly, when we think about in Drake's definition, you had to have radio telescopes. That's been 100 years, And if we got another 10,000, 100,000 years of history, that would be for us. It'd be pretty amazing, right? But that wouldn't be long enough to really pop up the number of civilizations in the galaxy. So you really need it to be like hundreds of millions of years, and that raises a question which I am very interested in, which is how do you even talk about? I call it the billionaire civilization, right? How do we even begin to hypothesize or think about in any kind of systematic way what happens to a technological civilization across hundreds of millions to a billion years?
Yeah, like how do you even simulate the trajectories that civilizations can take across that kind of time scale?
Yeah.
When all the data we have is just for the 10,000 years or so, 20,000 years that humans have been building civilizations.
Yeah.
And then just, I don't know what you put it at, but maybe 100 years that we've been technological.
Yeah. And we're ready to blow ourselves to bits or, drive ourselves off the planet. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. But there's got to be a way. I think that's really a frontier. So you had David Kipping on not too long ago. And David and I did a paper, and Caleb Scharf, David really drove this, where we, it was a Bayesian calculation to sort of ask the question, if you were to find a detection, if you were to find a signal or, a techno signature, would that come from a civilization that was younger, your age, or older? And you could see, I mean, this is not hard to do, but it was great. The formalism was hard. It's kind of intuitive, but the formalism was hard to show that, yeah, they're older, probably much older. So that means you really do need to think about like, okay, how do billion-year civilizations manifest themselves? What signatures will they leave? And yeah, can you even, I mean, what's so cool about it, it's so much fun because you have to imagine the unimaginable. Like, would you still, I mean, obviously biological evolution can happen on those kinds of timescales. So you wouldn't even really be the same thing you started out as, but social forms, what kind of social forms can you imagine that would be continuous over that? Or maybe they wouldn't be continuous. They drop out, they destroy themselves and then they come back. So maybe it's, it's a trunk or a punctuated evolution. I mean, but we got to this is the fun part. We have to sort of work this out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one way to approach that question is like, what are the different ways to achieve homeostasis as you get greater and greater technological innovation? So like if you expand out into the universe and you have optic Kardashev scale, what are the ways you can avoid destroying yourself? Just achieve stability while still growing.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's an interesting question. I think it's probably simulatable.
Could be. I mean, agent-based modeling, you could do it with. That's so, our group has used agent-based modeling to do something like the Fermi paradox. That was agent-based modeling. But you can also do this. People at Santa Fe have done this. Other groups have done this to use agent-based modeling to track the formation of hierarchies, the formation of stable hierarchies. So I think it's actually very doable. But understanding the kind of assumptions and principles that are going into it and what you can extract from those, that is what is sort of the frontier.